London, 1856. The courier arrived just as Miss Eleanor Fairmont was instructing her younger sister on proper posture at the pianoforte. The letter bore the unmistakable seal of her father's solicitor, a sight that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Continue practicing, Louisa." "Mind your wrists," Eleanor murmured, taking the missive with trembling fingers. The contents confirmed her worst fears. Their father's death 3 months prior had left them not merely in mourning but in financial ruin. The modest townhouse in which they resided would be sold to satisfy creditors. They had precisely 1 month to vacate. Eleanor stared out the window at the rain-slicked cobblestones of Berkeley Square. She was 22, beyond the first flush of youth by society's cruel standards, with 2 younger sisters and a mother who had never managed a household budget in her life. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a leaden cloak. "Is it terrible news?" Louisa asked, her fingers stilling on the keys. Eleanor composed her features into a placid mask. "Nothing we cannot overcome with dignity," she replied, though her mind raced with desperate calculations. That evening, as rain lashed against the windows, Eleanor sat in her father's study, a room she had rarely entered during his life but had come to inhabit since his passing. She pored over the household accounts by candlelight, searching for some miracle of mathematics that might spare them from destitution. A sharp knock at the front door startled her. Visitors at this hour were unusual, particularly in such inclement weather. Their lone remaining servant, Mrs. Winters, shuffled to answer it. Moments later, the study door opened to reveal not Mrs. Winters but a tall, imposing figure. Water dripped from his greatcoat onto the carpet as he regarded her with a penetrating gaze. "Miss Fairmont, I presume?" His voice was deep, authoritative. Eleanor rose, acutely aware of her informal evening attire and loosened hair. "Yes. And you are?" "Edward Blackwood, Earl of Thornfield." He made no bow, no customary pleasantries. "I've come to discuss a matter of some urgency regarding your father's debts." The name struck her like a physical blow. The Earl of Thornfield was notorious in London society, a reclusive, stern widower whose name was spoken in hushed tones. Some said grief had hardened him after his wife's death, others whispered of darker secrets. "My lord, this is highly irregular," Eleanor began, reaching for the bell-pull. "What is irregular, Miss Fairmont, is your father's theft of my investment funds." The accusation hung in the air between them. Eleanor's hand froze mid-motion. "I beg your pardon," she whispered. "Your father acted as trustee for certain properties of mine. Before his death, he diverted a considerable sum, £20,000, into speculative ventures that have since collapsed." Eleanor sank back into her chair. "That cannot be. My father was many things, but he was not a thief." "The evidence suggests otherwise." The Earl's jaw tightened. "However, I'm not here to debate your father's character. I'm here to propose a solution." "A solution?" Eleanor's mind whirled. £20,000 was an astronomical sum, far beyond anything they could hope to repay, even if they sold every possession. Lord Thornfield removed his gloves with deliberate precision. "You have 2 choices, Miss Fairmont. I can present my findings to the authorities, which will result in the immediate seizure of all your family's assets and a public scandal that will destroy your sister's prospects forever." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. "And the second option?" His eyes, gray as the stormy sky outside, met hers. "You become my wife." The silence that followed was broken only by the ticking of the mantel clock and the distant rumble of thunder. "That is preposterous," Eleanor finally managed, rising to her feet. "You cannot be serious." "I assure you, I am entirely serious." He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of rainwater and sandalwood. "I require a wife to manage my household and serve as stepmother to my daughter. You require financial salvation and protection from scandal. It is a practical arrangement." "Practical?" Eleanor nearly choked on the word. "Marriage is a sacred bond, my lord, not a business transaction." A mirthless smile curved his lips. In our circles, Miss Fairmont, it is precisely that. You've simply been sheltered from this reality. Eleanor turned away, mind racing. The thought of marrying this cold, forbidding man repulsed her. Yet the alternative, watching her mother and sisters descend into poverty and disgrace, was unthinkable. Why me? She asked quietly. Surely a man of your station could find a more suitable bride. I have no interest in navigating the marriage mart again, he replied. You are well educated, from a respectable family despite your father's indiscretions, and by all accounts possess a sensible nature. My daughter needs stability, not a frivolous society wife concerned only with balls and gowns. Eleanor felt a flicker of indignation. You know nothing about me. I know enough. He moved toward the door. You have until tomorrow evening to decide, Miss Fairmont. After that, I present my evidence to the magistrate. With that, he departed, leaving behind only the lingering scent of rain and the weight of an impossible choice. The Earl of Thornfield's ancestral home loomed against the twilight sky like a great beast crouching on the Yorkshire moors. Eleanor gazed up at its grey stone facade from the carriage window, her stomach knotting with apprehension. 2 weeks had passed since that fateful night. 2 weeks since she had accepted Lord Thornfield's proposal, enduring her mother's tearful protests and society's barely concealed whispers. The hasty wedding ceremony in the village church near her former home had been attended only by immediate family and the Earl's solicitors. No celebration followed, no wedding breakfast or toasts to their future happiness. Now, as the carriage pulled into the circular drive of Thornfield Hall, Eleanor clutched her reticule more tightly. Inside was the marriage certificate, the document that had sealed her fate and saved her family from ruin. The Earl had travelled ahead to prepare the household for her arrival, leaving Eleanor to follow with her lady's maid, Agnes, the next day. She had not seen her husband since speaking their vows. Husband. The word felt foreign, incongruous. A solemn butler greeted her at the entrance, bowing stiffly. Lady Thornfield, welcome. I am Phillips. The title startled Eleanor. In the tumult of recent events, she had scarcely considered that she was now a countess. Thank you, Phillips, she replied, removing her gloves. Is his lordship at home? The Earl is in his study and asks that you join him once you've refreshed yourself from your journey. Phillips signaled to a maid. Martha will show you to your chambers. The chambers proved to be an elegant suite of rooms in the east wing, decorated in muted blues and silver. A connecting door presumably led to the Earl's bedroom, though it remained firmly closed. After washing the dust of travel from her face and changing into a simple evening dress of deep green silk, one of the few new garments she'd been able to commission before leaving London, Eleanor steeled herself for the meeting with her husband. Phillips led her through a maze of corridors to a heavy oak door, which he opened with a discreet knock. Lady Thornfield, my lord. Edward Blackwood stood before the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantelpiece. In evening attire, he cut an even more imposing figure than she remembered, tall and broad-shouldered, with features that might have been considered handsome were they not set in such a severe expression. Thank you, Phillips. That will be all. The Earl waited until the door closed before addressing Eleanor. I trust your journey was comfortable? Quite, thank you, she replied, remaining near the doorway. Your home is most impressive. It has been in the Blackwood family for 10 generations. He gestured to a chair opposite his own. Please, sit. We have matters to discuss. Eleanor complied, arranging her skirts with deliberate care. I presume you wish to explain my duties as mistress of Thornfield Hall. Something like surprise flickered across his face before the impassive mask returned. Yes. Although the household runs efficiently under Mrs. Wilson, the housekeeper, there are certain social obligations that have been neglected since my first wife's passing. How long ago did Lady Thornfield die? Eleanor asked, then immediately regretted her directness when his expression darkened. 5 years ago. Shortly after giving birth to my daughter, Catherine. I am sorry for your loss, she said softly. He inclined his head slightly. Catherine is now 5 years old. Her governess, Miss Hartley, oversees her education, but I expect you to take an interest in her development as well. She should learn the social graces a young lady of her station requires. Of course. I look forward to meeting her. You will, tomorrow at breakfast. He moved to his desk and retrieved several ledgers. These contain the household accounts. I've instructed Mrs. Wilson to review them with you at your convenience. Eleanor accepted the books, noting their meticulous organization. I shall familiarize myself with them promptly. Good. He hesitated, then continued in a more measured tone. There is one other matter. Our arrangement. The air in the room seemed to thicken. I understand marriage typically involves certain expectations, he said, studying a point just beyond her shoulder. However, I want to assure you that I will not impose unwanted attentions. We shall maintain separate bedchambers. Relief and an unexpected twinge of something like disappointment warred within Eleanor. I appreciate your consideration, my lord. Edward, he corrected. In private, at least, we should observe that convention. Edward, she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. Then you must call me Eleanor. He nodded once, then turned away to pour a glass of brandy. You must be tired from your journey. I won't keep you further. The dismissal was clear. Eleanor rose, clutching the ledgers to her chest. Good night, then. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. He stood silhouetted against the fire, a solitary figure in that grand room. I wish to say something, she said suddenly. He turned, one eyebrow raised in question. I may not have chosen this marriage, but I am committed to fulfilling my role with dignity and diligence. I ask only for your respect in return. For a moment, she thought she glimpsed something soften in his expression. You have it, he replied quietly. With a slight curtsy, Eleanor departed, leaving her husband alone with his brandy and his thoughts. Catherine Blackwood proved to be a solemn child with her father's grey eyes and a reserve that seemed unnatural in one so young. When Eleanor joined the breakfast table the next morning, the girl had studied her with wary curiosity. Good morning, Eleanor said warmly. You must be Catherine. I'm very pleased to meet you. Are you my new mamma? The child asked, her voice small but direct. Eleanor glanced at Edward, who was watching the interaction carefully from behind his newspaper. I am your father's wife, she answered honestly. Whether I become your mamma depends on us getting to know one another. Would you like that? Catherine considered this with a seriousness that reminded Eleanor painfully of her husband. Miss Hartley says I must call you my lady. That is the proper form of address, Edward interjected, folding his newspaper precisely. Lady Thornfield is your stepmother now, Catherine. Perhaps, Eleanor suggested gently, she might call me Eleanor when we are alone together? Formality has its place, but family should have some privileges, should it not? Edward's jaw tightened momentarily, but he made no objection. Catherine's expression remained solemn, though Eleanor thought she detected a flicker of interest in those grey eyes. In the days that followed, Eleanor immersed herself in learning the rhythms of Thornfield Hall. She reviewed the accounts with Mrs. Wilson, toured the gardens with the head groundskeeper, and met the tenants of the nearest farms. At every turn, she was conscious of being measured against the memory of the First Lady Thornfield. The late Countess rarely concerned herself with the household accounts, Mrs. Wilson remarked one afternoon as they completed their review. Did she not? Eleanor asked, careful to keep her tone neutral. The housekeeper's lips thinned. Lady Amelia preferred social engagements. She found country life constraining. I see. Eleanor closed the ledger carefully. I find I prefer it to London, actually. There's an honesty to it that society lacks. Mrs. Wilson's expression softened fractionally. His lordship said you were sensible. The comment, clearly meant as approval, left Eleanor wondering what else Edward had said about her. Their interactions remained formal, limited to brief conversations at dinner when he was not away on estate business. He was unfailingly polite but distant, retreating to his study most evenings. It was Catherine who gradually began to breach the wall of Eleanor's isolation. The child appeared at her door one rainy afternoon, clutching a battered volume of fairy tales. "Miss Hartley has a headache," she announced without preamble. "Father says I must not disturb him in his study." Eleanor set aside her correspondence. "Would you like me to read to you?" Catherine nodded, climbing onto the window seat beside Eleanor with unexpected confidence. As Eleanor began to read about princesses and enchanted forests, she felt the child lean against her arm, small and warm. When Edward returned from his business in the village, he found them thus engaged. Eleanor looked up to find him watching from the doorway, an unreadable expression on his face. "Papa!" Catherine exclaimed. "Eleanor is reading about the glass mountain. The prince must climb it to rescue the princess." "Is he, indeed?" Edward's gaze lingered on Eleanor. "And will he succeed, do you think?" "He must," Catherine declared. "Otherwise, it would be a very poor story." A smile, the first genuine one Eleanor had witnessed, briefly transformed Edward's stern features. "Very true, little one." Later that evening, as they sat in the drawing room after dinner, Edward broke their customary silence. "Catherine seems to have taken to you." Eleanor set down her embroidery. "She's a remarkable child. Thoughtful and observant." "Too serious for her years," he murmured, almost to himself. "Perhaps," Eleanor ventured, "she reflects the atmosphere around her." His head came up sharply. "You think I'm too stern with her?" "No, not at all. You clearly love her deeply." Eleanor chose her words with care. "But children often mirror the emotions of those they love. If they sense sadness or reserve." Edward stood abruptly and moved to the window, his back to her. For a moment, Eleanor feared she had overstepped. "You speak as though you have experience with children," he said finally. "I practically raised my sisters after our mother's health declined," she explained. "There were times when my own worries affected them, though I tried to hide it." He turned to face her, his expression softer than she had ever seen it. "You sacrificed much for them, didn't you? Even before our arrangement." The simple perception in his words caught her off guard. "They are my family. One does what one must." "Indeed." He studied her for a long moment. "I begin to understand why my solicitor recommended you." "Your solicitor?" Eleanor frowned. "I don't understand." Edward returned to his chair, his movements deliberate. "When I discovered your father's misappropriation, I instructed Mr. Harrington to investigate the family before taking legal action. His report on you was compelling." "You investigated me?" Eleanor felt a flush of indignation rise to her cheeks. "I investigated your entire family," he corrected. "Your mother's frivolous nature, your youngest sister's delicate health, your middle sister's artistic temperament. And you, the capable one, the one who managed the household after your mother took to her bed with nerves, the one who sacrificed her own prospects to care for the others." Eleanor stood, hands trembling. "You had no right to pry into our private affairs." "I had every right," he countered, though without heat. "Before making you mistress of my home and stepmother to my daughter, I needed to know your character." "My character?" Her voice rose slightly. "You forced me into marriage with the threat of exposing my father's alleged crimes." "What does that say about your character, my lord?" His eyes darkened. "Your father's crimes were not alleged. They were documented and provable." "Then why not simply have him prosecuted posthumously? Why involve me at all?" Edward's expression shifted, vulnerability briefly replacing sternness before he masked it again. "Because Catherine needed a mother. Not a governess or a nurse, a mother. And I." He stopped, seemingly unable to continue. "You what?" Eleanor pressed, moving closer. I needed a wife who would not find Thornfield Hall as imprisoning as Amelia did, he admitted quietly. Someone who valued substance over society, duty over diversion. The raw honesty in his words diffused Eleanor's anger. She sank back into her chair, studying his face, the lines of strain around his eyes, the set of his jaw. "Tell me about her," she said softly. "About Amelia." Edward looked startled by the request, then pained. For a moment, Eleanor thought he would refuse. She was beautiful, he began hesitantly. Vivacious. The toast of her season. I was captivated. Eleanor listened as he described a whirlwind courtship, a grand wedding, and the gradual disillusionment that followed. Amelia had found Yorkshire dull after London's excitement. She had little interest in estate management and less in motherhood. She died of childbed fever, he concluded, his voice hollow. Her last words to me were an apology for giving me a daughter instead of a son. "Oh, Edward," Eleanor whispered, her heart aching for both him and for Catherine. Without thinking, she reached across the space between them and touched his hand. He stared at their joined hands as though they were something alien, then slowly turned his palm upward to clasp her fingers. "I have been unfair to you," he said, meeting her eyes. "Holding you at a distance, treating our marriage as merely a contract. You deserved better." "Perhaps we both did," she replied gently. That night marked a subtle shift in their relationship. Edward began to join Eleanor and Catherine for afternoon readings. He sought her opinion on estate matters. At dinner, their conversations extended beyond pleasantries to genuine discussions of books, music, and even politics. One evening, nearly a month after Eleanor's arrival, Edward invited her to review plans for improvements to the tenants' cottages in his study. As they bent over the architectural drawings, their heads close together, Eleanor became acutely aware of his proximity, the clean scent of his shaving soap, the warmth radiating from his body. "These modifications to the ventilation will make a significant difference in winter," she observed, trying to focus on the documents before them. "Yes, though they increase the cost considerably." His voice was close to her ear. Eleanor turned to respond and found his face inches from her own. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to thicken. For one breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he straightened abruptly. "It's growing late. We should continue this tomorrow." Disappointment washed through her, followed by confusion at her own reaction. This was a marriage of convenience, not romance. Yet increasingly, she found herself drawn to the man beneath the stern exterior, the father who looked at his daughter with such tenderness, the landowner who cared deeply for his tenants' welfare, the widower still haunted by grief. The next morning brought unexpected news. A letter arrived from London, bearing the crest of Eleanor's former neighbor. "Bad news?" Edward inquired, noting her frown as she read the contents at the breakfast table. Eleanor hesitated. "It seems my reputation in London has become the subject of rather malicious gossip. Mrs. Harrington writes that rumors abound regarding our hasty marriage. Some suggest I trapped you in some way, while others imply less savory motives on your part." Edward's expression darkened. Society rarely has anything better to do than speculate on matters that don't concern them. The rumors have apparently reached my mother and sisters. Mrs. Harrington says they've become virtual recluses, unwilling to face the whispers. "I'm sorry," he said, with genuine regret. "Perhaps a visit might be in order? To show society that our marriage is respectable." The hesitation before his last words spoke volumes. Eleanor felt a sharp pang of hurt, quickly suppressed. "Yes," she agreed coolly. "We must present a united front for appearance's sake." His brow furrowed at her tone. "Eleanor, if you'll excuse me," she interrupted, rising from the table. "I promised Catherine we would collect flowers for pressing today." She departed before he could respond, angry at herself for feeling wounded by what was merely the truth. Their marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. That she had begun to wish otherwise was her own foolishness. London in the height of the season was a whirl of carriages, calling cards, and carefully orchestrated social encounters. Eleanor had forgotten the exhausting nature of society's demands during her peaceful months at Thornfield Hall. They had taken up residence in Edward's London house, a stately townhome in Grosvenor Square. Catherine had remained in Yorkshire with her governess, deemed too young for the rigours of the season. Their first public appearance together was at Lady Westmoreland's ball, an event Eleanor had approached with trepidation. She had selected her gown with particular care, a deep blue silk that complemented her fair colouring without being ostentatious. "You look lovely," Edward commented as they prepared to depart. He wore formal evening attire, the stark black and white emphasizing his height and the breadth of his shoulders. "Thank you," she replied, adjusting her gloves nervously. "I confess I'm rather anxious about tonight." His expression softened. "We need only make a brief appearance. An hour, perhaps 2, and then we may escape." The use of "we" and the conspiratorial tone warmed her heart despite her nerves. Lady Westmoreland's ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, the light reflecting off jewels and gilt decorations. As they entered, conversation noticeably faltered before resuming with heightened intensity. "The vultures are circling," Edward murmured, his hand warm at the small of Eleanor's back. "Remember, you are the Countess of Thornfield. You have nothing to prove to these people." His steadfast support gave her courage. Eleanor held her head high as they made their way through the crowd, exchanging greetings with acquaintances. Some were genuinely cordial, others barely disguised their curiosity behind social niceties. "Lady Thornfield. How delightful to see you again." The honeyed voice belonged to Lady Harrington, their former London neighbour. "Marriage seems to agree with you, though we were all so surprised by its suddenness." "Thank you, Lady Harrington," Eleanor replied evenly. "Lord Thornfield and I found we shared many common values and saw no reason to delay once we'd reached an understanding." "How romantic," Lady Harrington simpered, her eyes calculating. "And how is dear Catherine adjusting to her new stepmother?" Before Eleanor could respond, Edward intervened. "My daughter adores her, as do I. We count ourselves most fortunate." He placed his hand over Eleanor's where it rested on his arm, the gesture possessive and intimate. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks at the public declaration, however performative it might be. Lady Harrington's smile tightened. "How fortunate indeed. If you'll excuse me, I see the Duchess of Richmond has just arrived." As she moved away, Edward leaned closer to Eleanor. "You're doing admirably." "As are you," she replied softly. "Though I fear you'll start rumors of an entirely different sort if you continue to look at me that way." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Would that be so terrible? Before she could decipher his meaning, they were approached by a gentleman Eleanor had never seen before, a distinguished man of about 50, with shrewd eyes and an air of authority. "Thornfield," he greeted Edward, then turned to Eleanor with a courteous bow. "And this must be your new countess." "A pleasure, my lady." "Eleanor, allow me to introduce Lord Ashworth, an old friend of my father's," Edward said. "James, my wife, Lady Thornfield." "Enchanted," Lord Ashworth said, his assessment of Eleanor keen but not unkind. "I understand you've been in Yorkshire these past months. How do you find Thornfield Hall?" "Magnificent, my lord," Eleanor replied sincerely. "The estate is beautiful, and the people have been most welcoming. More welcoming than London society, I'd wager," he said with a knowing glance around the room. Edward's expression darkened. "Has there been talk?" Lord Ashworth shrugged slightly. "No more than usual when a wealthy peer marries unexpectedly. Though I did hear some nonsense about financial improprieties involving the lady's father." Eleanor felt herself pale. Edward's hand tightened on hers. "Baseless gossip," he said firmly. "Of course," Lord Ashworth agreed smoothly. "But perhaps we might speak privately on a related matter? I wouldn't normally intrude on your evening, but it seems pertinent given what I've heard." Edward hesitated, looking at Eleanor. My wife and I have no secrets. Whatever you wish to say can be said before her. The declaration, unexpected and powerful, filled Eleanor with warmth. Lord Ashworth nodded, leading them to a relatively quiet alcove near the terrace doors. I was recently approached by a Mr. Harrington, a solicitor, I believe? My solicitor, Edward confirmed, his posture tense. He was seeking information about certain investment funds related to the Central Indian Railway Company. Specifically, those managed by the late Mr. Fairmont. Lord Ashworth's gaze shifted to Eleanor. Your father, I presume. Eleanor nodded, her throat suddenly dry. What information did you provide? Edward asked. None, as yet. I found the timing of his inquiry curious, given the recent rumors. Lord Ashworth lowered his voice. Thornfield, I sat on that board with your father for 20 years. If there were improprieties involving those funds, I would have known. Eleanor's heart began to pound. Are you saying my father didn't misappropriate the investment funds? Lord Ashworth looked troubled. I'm saying the records Mr. Harrington described to me don't match the transactions I recall authorizing. There's something irregular here, but I'm not convinced it was your father's doing. Edward had gone very still beside her. James, are you certain? I've requested the original documentation from the company archives, Lord Ashworth replied. They should arrive within the week. Until then, I can only tell you my recollection conflicts with what your solicitor presented. The implications were staggering. Eleanor felt lightheaded, gripping Edward's arm to steady herself. If you'll excuse us, Edward said to Lord Ashworth, his voice tight. I believe my wife needs some air. He guided Eleanor through the French doors onto the terrace, which was mercifully deserted. The night air was cool against her heated skin. Edward, she began, her voice trembling. If Lord Ashworth is correct, then I have done you and your family a grave injustice, he finished, his face anguished in the moonlight. Eleanor stared at him, a tide of emotions rising within her, hope that her father's name might be cleared, confusion over what this meant for their marriage, and beneath it all, a terrible fear that Edward might regret their union entirely. What happens now? She whispered. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. Now I investigate the truth with all the resources at my disposal. If your father was innocent, I will make it known publicly. Your family's reputation will be restored. And thus? The question slipped out before she could stop it. What of our marriage? His expression softened, and to her surprise, he reached up to touch her cheek gently. Eleanor, do you wish to be free of me? The directness of the question took her breath away. In the months of their marriage, something had grown between them, something tenuous but precious. The thought of losing it made her heart contract painfully. No, she admitted softly. Though perhaps I should, considering the circumstances. I married you believing I was offering a merciful alternative to public disgrace, he said, his voice low and intense. I told myself it was for Catherine's sake, for the estate's need of a proper mistress. But the truth is far more selfish. Selfish? Eleanor echoed, confused. From the moment you stood in your father's study and faced me with such dignity and courage, I was drawn to you. His thumb traced her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting with tears. I could have found another way to address your father's supposed theft. I chose marriage because I wanted you in my life, even if I didn't fully understand why at the time. Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. Edward, are you saying? I'm saying that regardless of what Lord Ashworth's investigation reveals, I do not regret our marriage, he interrupted gently. What began as an arrangement has become the greatest blessing of my life. Unless you wish otherwise, I would have it continue. The admission, so unexpected and heartfelt, broke through the last of Eleanor's reserves. I have come to care for you deeply, she confessed, her voice barely audible above the distant music from the ballroom. Both you and Catherine. The thought of losing you, she didn't finish the sentence, for Edward had drawn her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of longing finally acknowledged. Eleanor yielded to it willingly, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they parted, breathless, the look in Edward's eyes made her flush with warmth despite the cool night air. "I believe," he said, his voice husky, "that we have made a sufficient appearance for one evening. Shall we return home, my lady?" Eleanor smiled up at him, happiness spreading through her like dawn breaking over Thornfield's moors. "Yes, my lord. Let us go home." The return to Yorkshire a fortnight later was marked by a sense of renewal. Lord Ashworth's investigation had confirmed his suspicions. The financial irregularities had been the work of Mr. Harrington himself, who had manipulated records to implicate Mr. Fairmont after his death. When confronted with the evidence, Harrington had confessed, facing disgrace and criminal charges. Edward had been devastated by the betrayal of his trusted solicitor and horrified by his own unwitting role in the scheme. He had made public amends, ensuring that newspaper notices clearing Mr. Fairmont's name appeared in all the major papers. Eleanor's mother and sisters had been invited to Thornfield Hall, where they were now ensconced as honored guests. As their carriage approached the manor, Catherine came running down the drive to meet them, her governess hurrying behind. "Papa!" "Eleanor," she called, her face alight with joy, a transformation from the solemn child Eleanor had first met months ago. Edward swept his daughter into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down so she could embrace Eleanor as well. "I missed you," Catherine declared, slipping her small hand into Eleanor's. "Did you bring me a present from London?" "Catherine," Miss Hartley admonished, catching up to them. "That is not polite." "But it is honest," Edward laughed, ruffling his daughter's hair. "And yes, we did bring presents, though you'll have to wait until after dinner to see them." As they walked toward the house, Catherine chattering about the fox cubs she had spotted near the orchard, Eleanor felt Edward's gaze on her. She glanced up to find him watching her with an expression of such tenderness it made her heart swell. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, reaching for his hand. Later that evening, after Catherine had been put to bed with her new illustrated book of fairy tales, Edward led Eleanor to the garden. The summer twilight lingered, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached a stone bench nestled among roses. "I have something for you," Edward said, reaching into his pocket. "A belated wedding gift." He placed a small velvet box in her palm. Inside lay a ring of delicately wrought gold, set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Edward, it's beautiful," she breathed. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, taking the ring and sliding it onto her finger beside her plain gold wedding band. "She was the only truly happy marriage I knew growing up. My parents' union was cordial at best." "Is that why you believed a marriage of convenience was all that could be expected?" Eleanor asked gently. He nodded, his thumb caressing the back of her hand. "I never imagined finding what we have. Even with Amelia, for all her beauty and vivacity, there was never this sense of partnership." "Nor did I expect to find love in an arranged marriage," Eleanor admitted. "Yet here we are." Edward's eyes darkened at her words. "Say it again," he requested softly. She smiled up at him, no longer afraid to name what had grown between them. "I love you, Edward Blackwood. With all my heart." He drew her into his arms, his kiss a promise and a pledge. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you, Eleanor Blackwood," he whispered. "You brought light back into my life when I believed it lost forever. Your gentle spirit has transformed not only my lonely world but Catherine's as well." "You both transformed mine equally," she replied. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose, and your heart." As twilight deepened into night, they remained in the garden, planning their future together, a future neither had dared imagine when they spoke their vows. What had begun as an arrangement of necessity had blossomed into a love as enduring as Thornfield Hall itself, built on honesty, forged through adversity, and destined to flourish through all the seasons to come.